I get discouraged for sure, and I will quit fighting at some point. And that point is when the first shovel of dirt hits the top of my box 6 feet down.
Hello and welcome to COS Indiana Live as we bring you Roundtable. The Roundtable segment is presented here every fourth Monday of the month at 7 p.m. We'll be focusing on education and discussion of the topics and challenges we all face as we use the Constitution to save the Constitution. Join us now as we bring you COS Indiana Roundtable with our MC, John Ackerman.
Welcome to COS Indiana Live Roundtable for the month of November 2023. I'm your host, John Ackerman. This is broadcast number 222 of COS Indiana Live, and we're glad you're here. This month's topic is going to be the administrative state, and I'm going to explain that to you in a minute right after I bring the panel on. Let's have our panel come on the screen right now. Gary Harbaugh, a member of our Indiana team. Welcome back, Gary. Haven't seen you in a month or two.
Here I am.
Good to have you here. And Dale Parrish, our virtual program coordinator. Is that what VPC means?
Yeah, that's what it is. Yes, it's not an official title, but
it works.
They got to call me something.
Looking good tonight, Dale. Yep, I'll call you something.
All right.
And Ken Kashuba, our state communications coordinator.
How you doing, John?
I'm doing well. And our final panel member is Brett Sturley, the COS Missouri State Director. Brett, you've been here before, and we're very happy to have you back, so welcome.
Well, thanks for having me back. Apparently, I didn't kill the ratings, and if you run out of any names to call Dale, just let me know, and I'll come up with a couple.
Okay, thanks.
See, here we go, John. He just never fails.
Well, okay. Brett's a good guy. I want to bring him back more often now.
Yeah, you would.
Hey, Ken, how about telling our audience about that QR code up in the corner?
That little thing way up there? Yeah, that's the QR
thing.
code. That's the COS Indiana subscribe now button. Get your cameras out, take a quick shot of that, and put your name and email address in, and you'll get up to date information about COS Indiana Live every month, starting in December. I think we're going to be starting that, and get you a lot of behind the scenes information. So we encourage you to get on board, subscribe, and share it with your friends.
Thanks, Ken. And that QR code will remain in the corner for the duration of the roundtable. Okay, here we go. Well, as I told you a minute ago, our topic is the administrative state. What is that? Well, according to the American University in Washington, D.C., the federal government is the nation's largest employer with more than 4.5 million employees. Let that sink in. More than 4.5 million employees in about 100 agencies and bureaus. Most of those 4.5 million are in the executive branch, and this is what is referred to as the administrative state. According to Ballotpedia, the administrative state, is the phenomenon of executive branch agencies exercising the undelegated, really, power to create, adjudicate, and enforce their own rules. And that's a problematic proposition. That's what we're here to talk about tonight. So let's go around the table and ask each participant, big picture, from the 30,000 foot level, how do you see the administrative state? What's your viewpoint on that? And let's start with Brett from Missouri.
Well, thanks, John. I want to kind of start out with this is a quote from Mark Levin in the Liberty Amendments, and it kind of touches and expands upon what you said there in your comments. He, quoting Mark, what was to be a relatively innocuous federal government operating from a defined enumeration of specific grants of power has become an ever-present and unaccountable force. It is the nation's largest creditor, debtor, lender, employer, consumer, contractor, guarantor, property owner, tenant, insurer, healthcare provider, and pension guarantor. Moreover, with aggrandized police powers, what it does not control directly, it bans or mandates by regulation. So, I mean, I think that's just a great way to encapsulate what the administrative state is. To me, my view is that the administrative state is just a collection of agencies with faceless bureaucrats that violate our individual liberties with little or no effective oversight or accountability to we the people, and not really oversight from Congress either, because basically Congress uses the administrative state to execute things that would not, programs that would not be well received if they were passed in the in Congress through the legislative process, or if they were passed through the legislative process, would be outright unconstitutional, which many of them are anyway.
And thanks a lot, Brett. And we'll be digging into that and getting a lot of gold nuggets out of that. Gary, how do you see the administrative state?
John, I think we have to question the existence of the administrative state. Literally, the first substantive sentence in the United States Constitution says all legislative power herein granted is granted to a Congress which shall consist of a House of Representatives, a Senate, and a House of Representatives. And so the Constitution comes from we the people granting authority to make legislation to the Congress. And if we look at what is called in the law agency law, it doesn't have anything to do with government agencies, but basically the law of principal and agent. That law says very clearly that an agent cannot do anything that is beyond the scope of the authority they were granted, and that an agent can never grant their powers to a subagent without the express authority of the principal. So if we, the people, are the principal, we gave authority to Congress to pass laws. And unfortunately, the courts, rather than looking at the creation of federal agencies through the lens of agency law and the excessive, the grant of power to agencies that they should not have, the whole thing is, I think, questionable. And unfortunately, we need to figure out a way to rein that in. The courts early on, we didn't really have any regulatory agencies until 1897, when Congress created the Interstate Commerce Commission. It was created to regulate the railroads because people had been led to the belief that railroads were just this out of control entity. And so they created the Interstate Commerce Commission, but the Interstate Commerce Commission did not really have any real power, had very limited power. The court was able to agree that they could not set rates. They only had some limited executive and administrative authority. And for 45 years, we continued under that doctrine. And it wasn't too bad then, but the proverbial camel had its nose under the tent. And years later, they began to throw the whole tent off, and we're where we are today with hundreds of regulatory agencies doing all manner of things that they should not be doing.
Okay. That's a pretty interesting history lesson along with that. Thanks, Gary. Dale, how do you see the administrative state?
Well, adding a little bit to Gary's history lesson, the administrative state came into being during the Progressive era, and Woodrow Wilson started it in 1913. Roosevelt, of course, expanded it in the 30s, and then President Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, expanded it even more in the 60s. So while I guess the intent was in order for us to handle the various issues that arose from the Industrial Revolution in this country. But like so many things in our government, and Gary touched on it with the nose of the camel, like so many things in our government, it's gotten out of control. And especially in the area of procedural rights. This is where the rights of the citizens of this country are being overturned and are being abused, and that's where it's gotten out of control, and it's very specific areas, and we'll touch on those as we go on through some other questions. But basically, out of control.
Okay, thanks, Dale. Now, if you're watching live on either Facebook or YouTube, you can give your personal answer to that question too. And Ken, I always call on Ken last. If you want to make a comment, just do so in the comment box on Facebook or YouTube, and Ken is going to keep an eye on those. Ken, anything from the audience yet, or do you have your own personal answer to how you view the administrative state?
Nothing from the audience yet, John, but I'll just use a simple example of just one area that pretty much explains it all in my mind. And that is in the example of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. It acts both as the prosecutor and the judge when the agency pursues financial penalties. And that's through enforcement of its regulations for publicly traded companies and investment activities. So if you don't see anything wrong with that just from the start, I don't know, none of us want to go to court and be ruled in that manner. So, when you're the prosecutor and the judge, you don't stand much of a chance.
True. That's true. Well, we're going to dig into it now. I've got three areas of criticism that are offered by opponents of the administrative state. To start with, they generally, and I would count myself as an opponent, and so would all five of us on the screen here, as opponents of the administrative state, generally center our arguments on what we consider to be constitutional violations. The Constitution was critically interested in separation of powers. The young American Republic had fought a war for independence to get away from the King of England, who acted as legislature, administrator, and judge. And they wanted to separate those three functions. And so Article 1 of the Constitution creates the legislative branch, Article 2 creates the executive branch, and Article 3 creates the judicial branch. And the opponents of the administrative state argue that the combination of legislative, executive, and judicial functions within these administrative agencies violates the separation of powers principle. And I'm convinced that it does. So I'm going to go around and ask each member of the roundtable to give one example from your own knowledge and research, one example of when a government agency wrongfully combined the legislative, executive, and judicial functions, thereby violating the Constitution's separation of powers principle. Gary, would you go first?
Sure. I can mention one that I had in mind, and that's the Securities Exchange Commission, but most all of the regulatory agencies. Let's take the EPA as an example. They make regulations about, the environment, water, things like that. And then they begin enforcement proceedings against those who they perceive violate those, and they bring them before an administrative law judge who gets his paycheck or her paycheck from the very same agency, very same people who are the prosecutors. And so there's really not a separation of powers. And this is it's not just a violation of a principle of the Constitution, it's really a violation of the idea of a fairness in an adjudicatory proceeding when the judge and the prosecutor are really paid by the same person.
Great example. Dale, give us an example.
You know, John, when you say that an agency is the judge, they do all three functions, including policing their. I think that's the definition of tyranny. Now, I could be wrong on that, but I think it's the definition of tyranny.
Yeah.
But the one example, there are so many, but the one that really pops in my mind is from 2013, the IRS targeting conservative groups, and the name that we're all familiar with, Lois Lerner, and what happened there. I mean, that's, I think, a perfect example of an agency that was trying to administer and punish constituents and citizens illegally. And the sad thing is, no one was ever held accountable for that. But that's the example. One of the examples that pops to my mind is the. I'm sure there are a lot of IRS examples, but that one obviously was a one that got a lot of national attention.
Yeah, whatever it's called, the nonprofit division of the Internal Revenue Service wrote the rules, administered the rules, made the judgments, and administered the punishments.
Right.
Yep. Right. All in one agency, and it seemed to boil down to one person. Although she got off scot-free, she got the golden parachute.
She sure did.
Man, you know. Okay, Brett, what do you say?
Well, I think, those are, we could talk until this time next month with all the violations. But one that kind of comes to mind that I'm passionate about is the COVID response, and this is a kind of an amalgamation between the National Institutes of Health, the Center for Disease Control, and the FDA. And really, I think President Trump surrendered his administration to these agencies in March of 2020 by them effectively taking over the executive branch and also legislating policy, and then also enforcing penalties, just like what you were talking about. So just some of the unconstitutional acts, you might remember, first it was 14 days to slow the spread, and that turned into 18 months or more in some areas.
Yeah.
They banned the use of well-established medicines, and even one medication that had won a Nobel Prize in recent history, just so they could get emergency use authorization for a new genetic therapy.
Yeah.
And they decreed some private individuals to be non-essential employees, which is probably the phrase that grinds my gears the most. I know my family thought I was thinks I'm pretty essential, and also with all the other people, with business owners that rely on a business owner for their livelihood. And then they just had, conflicting guidance, whether everyone has to wear a mask, no one has to wear a mask. You have to wear a mask going into a restaurant, but once you sit down in the booth, somehow COVID doesn't get down to the booth level. You're standing up, 6 feet away from everybody. Don't go outside. Small businesses they mandated small businesses to close, but big box retailers were allowed to stay open. Churches were closed, but you had gentlemen's clubs and marijuana dispensaries remained open. Family members dying in isolation, which is just 100% criminal. Couldn't have any funerals, no public funerals except for George Floyd's. George Floyd's was fine, And then the some of the stuff that we were told as far as like treatment guidelines with somebody going to the emergency room sick with COVID and basically told to go back home, and when they couldn't breathe anymore to come back to the hospital. I mean, this is totally asinine. And I think that everything that we're dealing with here today, whether it's election integrity issues, drop boxes, and, the ballot mules, inflation, a person who's comatose in the White House, open borders, the excess deaths we have from COVID and other ailments, and the died suddenly syndrome of just healthy individuals just keeling over and dying on the spot. I mean, I think every single one of those things can be traced to the government's COVID response, and it's criminal. People should be punished severely for that.
They should be, but I doubt that they will.
We can always hope.
Yeah.
Well, Brett's probably going to get us pulled off of YouTube, but that's okay.
Well, he didn't say any of the code words. He
came awful close.
He didn't name the medication that was banned.
I wanted to come right up to the line.
Mm-hmm.
You can DM me and I'll go further if anybody wants more information.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, Ken, what do you have? Anything from the viewing audience or anything from your own thinking?
I've got just a couple of comments. One here I'll show. Well, both of them are from our friend Scott, who says the whole government is doing it right now.
Oh yeah.
And he also wanted to bring up the fact about ivermectin. So
that's the word.
The word.
You're off the hook, Brett.
Now we're dead for sure.
That's the I word.
It was nice being on YouTube. Okay. Anything else, Ken?
No, not really. The EPA, I could probably come up with a list as long as my arm that the EPA has been involved in, and I think you don't have to look very far to find many injustices that come from the EPA, and a lot of these agencies just run willy-nilly and continue to get away with things.
Okay, so to sum this one up, it's the violation of the separation of powers principle. Again, the framers of the Constitution wanted to prevent tyranny, and to do so, you make three independent bodies. One body writes the laws, another body enforces the laws, and a third body interprets the laws and issues guilty or innocent or not guilty. Right, Gary. We can't. Courts don't say anybody's innocent. It's either guilty or not guilty. Right. So I caught myself saying that I word. Okay. So to sum it up, the first big objection to the administrative state is this violation of the separation of powers principle. Before we go on to the second and third one, we're going to take a short break here. I'm going to show you a trailer of a brand new movie concerning the Convention of States simulation, which happened just recently in Williamsburg, Virginia. Enjoy the trailer.
With those kind of ideals working together to find consensus for the betterment of our country.
People rise above the everyday and start thinking about what can they do to really make a contribution to the future of our country.
These are folks who understand what's at stake in the country. They understand their role as state legislators in that.
We cannot just pretend it'll fix itself. We cannot assume foolishly that somebody else will take care of this. This is our time.
Okay, and that simulation happened a couple of months ago, as I said, in Colonial Williamsburg, Virginia. And the premiere of that movie was last week on the 21st. So if you want to see it, it's free for the viewing, and it's right there at that URL. And Ken's going to put that in the comment box so you can have it even when this broadcast is over. But COS Simulation 2023.org. Basically, shorthand. That's where you'll find it. It's an important movie, and I'm sure you'll want to watch it if you want to find out more about how the actual convention can and should, and we all hope will, play out someday soon. Right, Dale?
That's right. That's
yes,
right.
sir. Okay. Well, let's move on to the second objection that we have to the administrative state, and that is the complaint that judges regularly subvert their responsibility to interpret the law by deferring to agency interpretations of statutes and regulations. So I'm going to ask each member of the panel to give an example of when a judge avoided his or her responsibility by deferring to an administrative state interpretation. And this time, Dale, would you go first?
Yeah, John, the one that I came across, and again, there are many of them here, but the one I came across was a case called, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Kaiser versus Wilkie. This was a case some years ago about was a Vietnam veteran, and he was trying to get benefits from the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the judge ruled in favor of the department's interpretation of the regulation, not taking into consideration the individual and what the specific needs were in that case. So that's the main one that I came across. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Kaiser versus Wilkie, I believe it was.
Okay, thanks, Dale. Good answer to my question, but I think the wrong question is on the banner. I think that's my next question. Yeah. This question has to do with a judge interpreting the law by deferring to agencies. Okay. So you gave a great example, Dale. Thank you. We just had the wrong banner up there. So, Brett, can you go next? When a judge violated or voided his or her responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back when the Obama administration argued in front of the Supreme Court regarding Obamacare, that throughout their whole entire argument, they argued that the individual mandate was a fee. And you can go through all the court records. At no point did the Department of Justice lawyers ever say the mandate was a tax. And there's absolutely the reason why this is a problem is there's absolutely just no constitutional authority for the federal government to mandate citizens to purchase a product or a service as a condition of legal residence. However, that's exactly what Obamacare did here by mandating that everybody purchased their own health insurance, eventually from the single point, eventually from the federal government, which what can go wrong there? Chief Justice John Roberts had written the majority opinion and basically rewrote the law, saying that the fee looked like a tax and it acted like a tax, and so therefore, Justice Roberts and the four liberal justices on the Supreme Court, their opinion was that Obamacare was constitutional under Congress taxing authority, which was an argument that the DOJ, that the administration never ever made. But Chief Justice John Roberts saw fit to rewrite the statute. What should have happened is it should have gone. The court should have said, no, this is unconstitutional. You can't say that this is a fee because there's no authority to levy that in the Constitution. Should have sent it back to Congress and said, you guys need to correct this and rewrite it to where that if they would have wanted it to be constitutional, say it was unconstitutional, they could go back instead of calling it a fee, just call it an outright tax. This is exactly what it was, and try to roll through that way. But John Roberts did not see it that way, so he effectively rewrote the legislation for Congress.
Okay, thanks, Brett. Gary, you got an example for us?
Yeah, John, I'm going to go back to the creation of the Interstate Commerce Commission. As I said, it had pretty limited authority. Then in 1943, in a case dealing with the Federal Communications Commission, the court said that as long as the regulation was made in the public interest for the public convenience or what they called necessity, that those regulations were okay. So this created this extremely vague standard. And then about another 40 years later, in 1984, the Supreme Court in the Chevron case said that if there is ambiguity in the law or uncertainty, that the federal courts should defer to the interpretation of the federal agencies. So this really kind of gave a blank check to the federal agencies to exploit any uncertainty in the law, to allow them to create regulations. And this interpretation really just opened the door wide open to abuse. And what we have today is we don't really have a government of laws. We have that are created by the people or by the will of the people. We have a system of laws created by regulators who are unaccountable and who really are not held to any standard. They can write their own standard in effect and make the regulations that they think are necessary. And we, the people, are kind of powerless against this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gary, did you say that Chevron decision was in 1984?
Yes. So
There's
we've
a book
been
by
living
that.
with that.
Well,
for
there's a
about
book by
40
that
years.
title, and I guess George Orwell was right. That was the year where this thing really took off. You know, as you said, it started back around the turn of the century, the turn of the 20th century, but it really took off with that Chevron decision. Okay, Ken, what do you have for us?
I've got nothing from the comments at this point. Any viewers out there have any comments or questions, feel free to post them. In the meantime, Gary and I should have conversed before the start of tonight's program, because Chevron was what I was going to mention as well. And I'm glad you brought up the 1984, because that's what had me looking then in that direction. But we've got nothing else here at this point from the peanut gallery.
Okay, so the natives are not restless tonight.
No, I think they're trying to soak it all in at this point. You know.
Well, this is a thick subject.
It really is.
And it's, when we hear about the administrative state, we don't like it. And when we take a look at what it is and what some of the objections are to it, it's overwhelming. It's mind-boggling. 4.5 million workers writing rules and judging who has violated the rules and administering fines and punishments in over 100 federal agencies. We just really cannot wrap our minds around it. And so my sympathy with the viewing audience. This is a very thick subject. Brett, what do you have?
Hey, John, something just kind of came to mind here, just to put a fine point on that. You're exactly right. There are over 90,000 pages of regulations in the Federal Register. And I've seen congressional testimony where department heads would come up and testify in front of Congress and be asked, how many of your department's regulations carry criminal penalties? And I have yet to see a department head that can answer that question. They have absolutely no idea. And again, going back to what we were saying earlier, they write the rules, they interpret the rules, they apply the rules, and then they enforce the penalties whenever somebody goes against their interpretation. So it is overwhelming.
Yeah, it's insane. It's crazy. Okay, well, I said there were three general kinds of objections, and that first one was that it's a violation of the principle of separation of powers. The second one here is when a judge, duly appointed or elected in some cases, state judges and so on, defers to an administrative agency. And here's the third kind of objection, big category of objection, the impartiality of federal agencies. The claim is made that the administrative adjudication process violates what's known as citizens' procedural rights. Citizen rights. So I'm going to ask the panel, can you give an example of when the bias of a federal agency violated citizen rights? And Brett, you're up first this time.
Well, I'm going to try to go right up to the YouTube approved line here again. My example is the Department of Justice, and I mean it's been weaponized against the Democrat Party's political opposition, and you can look just the January 6th incident is just one example. Now, first of all, there is absolutely no question that there were laws broken, and those people who broke laws should be, I've said this since day one, should be prosecuted and sentenced in accordance with the law. By whom it was that actually broke the laws and on whose behalf, that's up for debate. But a couple of things here, just showing some inconsistencies. GPS tracking was used to show every person that was in Washington, D.C. on January 5th and January 6th of 2021. And I mean, they know if you bought a Starbucks coffee, they know exactly where everybody was. Everybody was in the city. But then you keep in mind that the same GPS data from the same cell phones, that was claimed to be useless whenever tracking ballot harvesters depositing ballots in multiple drop boxes in the 2020 election.
Oh, yeah.
And then the second thing is just, President Trump is being prosecuted right now for having government documents at Mar-a-Lago that were under Secret Service protection. Those are documents that he could legally possess as a president of the United States and a past president. Joe Biden, and he's being prosecuted by the Department of Justice. Joe Biden had classified material from his time as a senator and also vice president, unsecured in his garage, to where he has absolutely no legal authority to have any of those documents in his possession at any time. And yet it came out a week or two ago that, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and take his Corvette out for a spin. We're going to get those documents back, and we're not going to prosecute him. So totally, people say that that's a two-tier justice system. I'd argue a two-tier justice system is no justice whatsoever.
Okay, yeah. So violations by the Department of Justice, ironically, violating citizen rights. Yeah. Gary, got an example?
Yeah, I want to talk about the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. When the COVID fear-mongering began, the president ordered OSHA to mandate vaccination for every federal agency and any employer that had more than 100 employees. And this was not based on scientific evidence that the OSHA had developed. And the president really just took it upon himself to make this regulation, but he enforced it through OSHA. So this was not tested or verified by others. You could say the Fauci and the National Institute of Health and so forth, but they didn't have the authority to make those regulations. So really two different agencies teamed up together under the president's direction to make a mandate, which was a violation of people's rights. It was a violation of the principles established at the Nuremberg trials and the Nuremberg Code. And it's just an example of how the government, when it's given excessive amount of power, can run away with that power, irrespective of the rights or the rules of the law that should be in place, and regardless of the rights of we the people.
Thank you, Gary. That's an excellent example. OSHA violating citizen rights. Dale.
I think one of the biggest examples that comes to my mind is the abortion issue. And in 1973, the Supreme Court basically wrote the law we call it the law, it really wasn't the law, Supreme Court can't write law, but Supreme Court did, and this country used that for decades as abortion rights, when in fact those rights belonged to the citizens in each state to determine their own rules with regard to abortion. But that was overruled and violated citizens' rights, basically. Now, it finally, I think, got corrected here just recently and returned to the states where it belonged to begin with. But I think that was a good example of a judge or Supreme Court, basically, using their own bias with regard to abortion.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about the violation of citizen rights. It violated the right to live to millions of unborn Americans.
Well, that's correct. That's another good point. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And even the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg was quoted as saying that Roe v. Wade was a bad decision. She I think would have supported abortion, but she said that was a bad decision. It never should have been made. Okay, Ken, you're the last one to take a crack at this one. What do you got?
Well, I have gone blank on the farmer's name, but there was a farmer, and I should have wrote this down. I didn't at the time, but there was
Clive
a farmer.
Bundy.
Yeah, there it is, Clive
I'm
Bundy.
I'm channeling you, Clive
Yes,
Bundy.
you did. Clive Bundy. I've gone blank on his name, but all you have to do is look up that case, and you'll see where basically Clyde has been severely wronged in that situation. And I think if you can go back and look at other cases, even in Black history, of Southern farmers who lost their land and farm rights by the government over time. And yeah, it's just, I think that you don't really have to look too far to see that we have many cases of injustice there throughout time.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Well, you know what? We got to fix this. We cannot allow this to continue. So what can we, the people, do to rein in this federal abuse of power? Dale, you're first.
I always get I always get to go first with this kind of question, and we have a solution as big as the problem, and that's calling for a convention of states for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution. And one of the areas that we want to address at a convention is government overreach. And this is exactly what we're talking about here with the administrative state. Example after example of government overreach in one form or another. And this is the way to address it, and that's to call a convention of states.
That's our big number one answer.
Yes.
Brett, what can you add to that?
Well, I would obviously completely agree with Dale, and that is a solution. And a lot of the problems that we've been talking about have been under court interpretation and expansion of the Commerce Clause and the General Welfare Clause, and just the General Welfare Clause, which if you're looking at the Constitution's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, it's an express authority for the federal government to tax and fund their 18 enumerated powers, and it was never viewed as a general permission to spend. And I think that James Madison put this well in a letter when he was talking about Alexander Hamilton's commentary on this. He said, "So what do you think of Hamilton's commentary on the terms of general welfare? The federal government has been hitherto limited to the specified powers. If not only the means, but the objects are unlimited, the parchment had better be thrown into the fire at once." Basically, what that means is, if this was supposed to be a general grant of spending authority, why would we waste time of specifically giving the federal government 18 specific things, enumerated powers, that they had jurisdiction for. And then the Commerce Clause has been really turned on its head as well. That's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. And all that says is to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes. It's pretty simple. But late in the 18th century, regulate meant to make regular, to facilitate. It wasn't to put a rule or a regulation like we would think of here today. It was specifically to say, hey, you know what? A bushel of wheat in Indiana is a bushel of wheat in Missouri. You know, a foot in Colorado is a foot in Minnesota. It was standardizing and making it possible to have trade beyond the states. And this is one thing that, like what Dale was saying, this is something, a restatement of the original intent of the General Welfare Clause and Commerce Clauses would basically negate a very, very large chunk of those 90,000 plus pages of federal regulations in the Federal Register.
Brett, that's terrific. I learned something that I didn't know, and that is about what regulation meant back in the day, to make regular. I didn't know that. So thank you. Gary, any ideas to add to this?
You know, I would encourage people simply to read, you know, Article 1, Section 1, Clause 1 of the Constitution that says all lawmaking power, legislative power is supposed to be in the Congress. And I want people to stop and think and start questioning why we have all these regulations. I think Brett mentioned about how many criminal penalties there are. And one of the fundamental principles of the common law was that, you know, crimes were to be carefully defined and limited. The idea of we, the people governing, was that we would determine what were crimes. Now we have unelected bureaucrats making all kinds of things crimes. And I mean serious crimes, felonies that you can go to prison for years. We, the people, have no power to stop that. And our Congress, which at one time actually made laws, today is a customer service agency. And if you have a complaint, you complain to your congressperson and they contact the regulatory agency on your behalf. They're not making laws. They're a customer service agency. And that's just completely on its head from what our government was intended to be. I'm going to argue with you on one thing, John. I think there are more than 300 regulatory agencies. And when I did a search on this several years ago, it was acknowledged that nobody really knew how many regulatory agencies there were.
Wow.
Because many of the existing agencies that are created by law also had the power and created sub-agencies under them. So nobody really knows how many there are. And it's a crazy, out of control system, and we got to fix it. And Dale has mentioned the solution, and I hope anyone who has not signed the petition will do so.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, Ken, last shot.
Yeah, last shot out. And all that I read, and you're probably right, Gary. Nobody really knows, but I read it was well over 490.
Woo!
And there's the amount of money that is spent is astronomical as well. But Convention of States. I mean, we have to go out at this with full force. But the only thing I really have to add to this is in Federalist number 62, James Madison warned that an excess of lawmaking is a disease to which our governments are most liable.
Wow. Yeah, Dale.
I just wanted to mention, you're talking about the number of different agencies. Some years ago, I did some research on this. Have you ever tried to find an organizational chart of our government?
Nope.
Oh, there are charts out there. You won't find it in one chart. It'll be pages of different charts, and it's amazing. I don't know, and they're probably changing all the time. But it's a maze. It's just
wow.
Amazing as to all the different groups and agencies and how they report. It's a fiasco.
Okay, one more thing from Ken and then Brett.
I did find the number, so I wanted to at least throw that out to you here. This is our hard tax dollars at work. According to the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the administrative state imposes almost 1.9 trillion in annual regulatory costs.
Ooh.
Let that sink in.
1.9 trillion.
Wow.
That was million would have been bad enough, but it's trillion.
I can't understand that number. Okay, Brett.
Well, yeah, just think about that. It's a $17 trillion annual economy and 1.9 trillion. So you're looking about 14%. I'm just using my public education background, about 14% of the entire size of the economy, which is ridiculous. But the thing I was going to point out is just the mere fact that nobody knows how many regulatory agencies out there. That should be a pretty good indication of how bad this problem is and how much we have to get it under control.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got us a great big problem. But Convention of States is a solution as big as the problem. And thank you all for your participation. That about wraps this one up. So I want to thank the Roundtable team. And now, here's a conversation that I had not long ago with our state director, Dale Tipton, to tell you how you can get involved in Convention of States. Indiana needs you. Talk to the audience about how they can become involved in Convention of States.
You bet. There's an effort that we've had ongoing for a while where we're communicating through links that deal with recruitment. As an organization, we have a lot of positions to fill, and positions have to be filled by volunteers. And if we're going to become citizen activists, which we really have to do to make a change in our government, people need to take positive steps to do things so that we can turn this ship of government around. And in Indiana, for example, we have 100 House districts, and we appoint what we call a district captain in each one of those districts. And in this particular link, this is a direct appeal for people to volunteer to become district captains, whereby they would be tasked with being the liaison between the people within that district and their elected representatives, their senator and their local representative. And then also they are responsible for spreading the word about Convention of States through various ideas, such as town halls or parade events or any kind of thing like that, where we can, mix in with the public, block walking, any number of things. And this allows direct involvement at a fairly high level where you're really your own manager and you will have all the assistance that you need, but the tools are presented there for you so that you can become an advocate for Convention of States and make a difference. And the other thing that's pointed out here, more towards the top of the page, is we are a past state. In February of 2016, Indiana signed the resolution. So as we try to recruit people, oftentimes we hear, well, you guys passed the resolution. It's been done a long time ago. What else is there to do? And there's a list here on this page of all of the different things, or many of the different things that we can do as individuals to support both the ongoing effort in Indiana and then how we can also assist neighboring states that maybe haven't passed the resolution yet. And so this is kind of the latest thing we've got. And this is ultimately the easiest thing we've done because the application is literally at the bottom of the page that you can fill out to become a district captain. So it's a one-click deal and you're there. And we're hoping some people will sign up to join the COS revolution.
Well, that brings us to the end of this month's Roundtable. Before I close it out, I want to give you our email address. If you have any questions at all about Convention of States, you can email them to us at raiseyourvoicecos@gmail.com. That's raiseyourvoicecos@gmail.com. Be sure to tune in next Monday, December the 4th at 7 p.m. for our next COS Indiana Live, where we're going to feature Mark Meckler's live stream church message, Dale Tipton on our 2024 COS goals, and Ken Sweetland, a new district captain in House District 36. And our next roundtable will be on the fourth Monday of December. That will be December 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Because that's Christmas Day, that will be a best of COS Indiana Live roundtable. And to close us out, here's a message from our national COS president, Mark Meckler, called The Day I'll Quit Fighting.
I struggle to empathize with people who would give up. It doesn't make sense to me. Sam Adams said, for those of you who prefer safety and security over liberty, over the animating fight for liberty, I hope that you enjoy licking the hands that feed you. May your chains rest lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you are our countrymen. Like, do you understand that your kids and you are sentencing your kids and your grandkids and your friends' kids and your neighbors' kids to a lifetime of slavery and servitude, literally, of fear, of living in the darkness, but never, ever, never, never, never give up. George Washington lost the majority of his battles that he fought in the American Revolution. If you read his writings, if you read the letters where he was writing to Congress asking for money and troops, he was saying, we're losing. I don't have the troops I need. I don't have the supplies I need. Did he quit? What about the guys on the beach at Normandy? Like, what did they do? Did they just quit? Oh, there's, a lot of guys are dying around me. It's really bad. It looks really dismal. Those cliffs are huge. Machine gun fire raining down on us. And it's too hard. We should just quit. Thank God those people didn't quit. If they had, where would we be? I get discouraged, for sure. And I will quit fighting at some point. And that point is when the first shovel of dirt hits the top of my box 6 feet down.